must know electron configuration, valence electrons, and Lewis dot symbols. It's important and it's imperative that you go back and listen to my lessons on valence electrons and Lewis dot symbols and electron configurations, because if you don't know electron configurations and how to pick out valence electrons, then the rest of this lesson makes no difference. So, one of the first things we need to learn in discussing how bonding is going to occur and how we're going to look at oxidation numbers, understand the octet rule. And the octet rule simply states elements will gain or lose electrons in order to obtain a noble gas valence. Now, they don't become a noble gas. They just gain or lose electrons in order to obtain a noble gas valence. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I know whether it gains or loses? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. Remember, it requires energy to gain or lose electrons. And nature moves towards the least resistance because this requires less energy. Nature goes the easiest route. How do we determine whether it gains or loses? Well, that depends. It depends on the nearest noble gas. Remember, they want to be a noble gas, or have a noble gas configuration, we should say. And so it's either going to gain electrons, move up, or it's going to lose electrons to drop down to the nearest noble gas. Let's look at oxygen. There's oxygen on the periodic table. And if you'll notice, oxygen has 6 valence electrons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, is oxygen going to lose 6 electrons or gain 2? Well, it's easier to gain 2. Sodium has 1 valence electron. Will it gain 7 or will it lose 1? Well, the easiest thing to do is to lose 1. So it's easier to lose 1 than to gain 7. Make sense? Well, let's take a little test. Gain or lose? Sulfur. Look at your periodic table. Will it gain or lose? Now, I'm not asking you how many, even though you could do that. I'm just asking you, will it gain or lose? And if you look at sulfur on the periodic table, it will gain. Find fluorine, number 9. And you look at it, it will gain. It's easier to gain 1 than to lose 7. Potassium, gain or lose? Well, it's number 19. Look at it there on the left-hand side. And it's going to be easier to lose 1 than to gain 7. Argon, neither. Why? Well, because argon is a noble gas, right? Carbon, it could go both ways. With carbon, it could gain 4, it could lose 4. It depends on what it's bonding with. With carbon, if it's bonding with a metal, more than likely carbon's gaining. If it's bonding with a non-metal, in many cases it's losing. You have to kind of look at it and weigh in on its electronegativity, which we'll learn about in another lesson. Hydrogen. Well, hydrogen's going to lose. Only has 1 electron. It tends to lose, but not always. There are exceptions. When hydrogen bonds with lithium or the other alkali metals, it tends to gain electrons and then has a negative charge. But usually hydrogen loses. And then calcium, of course, it's going to lose 2 instead of gaining 6. How'd you do? And let's look at oxidation numbers. Oxidation numbers are directly related to what we just learned. It's the possible charge an atom could obtain by gaining or losing electrons. And remember, electrons are negative, which means then if you gain something negative, you become more negative. If you lose something that is negative, you become less negative or more positive. And we just need to kind of keep that in mind. So lose electrons, positive. Gain electrons, negative. Oxygen. Well, we know that oxygen gains 2 electrons. We can look at that periodic table. We've already done it earlier in this lesson. Therefore, oxygen's possible charge is 2 negative, and we would write its anion as such. Also, once you know the charge, you know how many bonds the element is usually going to make. Sodium loses an electron. Therefore, its possible charge is +1. And there's its cation. Sodium has one bond. Review. Elements gain or lose electrons to obtain a noble gas valence. We call that the octet rule. Nature will move toward the least resistance. That is the easiest path. If an atom loses electrons, it's positive. And if it gains electrons, it's negative. All right.